Welcome everybody to Food Safety Fridays, our quarterly webinar series. As always, the recordings will be available on our YouTube channel, and you can find that link on the screen and in the chat. We'll go through a few slides, and then I'm going to stop the recording, and everybody will have a chance to ask questions. You're welcome to type your questions in the chat at any time, or wait until the end, and we'll allow everybody to unmute so you can ask your questions. So let's get started. All right. My name is Wendy White. I'm the industry manager for food and beverage here at Georgia Tech's Georgia Manufacturing Extension Partnership. Um, I am I head up the food and beverage extension along with my partner Andrea Hines. And as you can see, we both have extensive backgrounds in food manufacturing. So prior to joining the university, we did jobs exactly like y'all did in industry. So let's talk about the agenda. We're going to start off with what people are often most interested in when we're talking about allergens, and that's allergen labeling laws. So what are the allergen labeling laws for food? So we're going to go through that first. Then we're going to briefly talk about threshold levels. And then we're going to switch up a little bit and delve into some science and discover exactly how allergens work. We're going to briefly talk about ways that you can control allergens in your facility, and then switch to treatments and prevention for food allergens. And notice I have prevention in question mark because it's kind of an evolving science. And then we're going to round out things with a couple fascinating food allergen facts. All right. So, the reason why food allergens are so important is because it remains the most common cause of food recalls across the nation. And this is definitely true for FDA food recalls, but it's also true for USDA. So for those meat and poultry items as well. So this is kind of a fun graph because people often don't understand which specific food allergens cause a lot of these recalls. And this is just a snapshot in time, but in 2017, you can see milk allergens were by far the front runner when it came to causative agents for recalls, followed by, egg and peanut, soy, and almond. Now, you might be asking yourself, you know, why do we care about food allergens so much? And really, the answer is because it is very heavily regulated. So, both the FDA and the USDA have extremely strict food allergen labeling rules. A lot of this comes from the Food Allergen Labeling Consumer Protection Act of 2004, but this rule occasionally gets updated. We actually just had an update not that long ago, and we added a ninth declarable allergen, sesame, to that list of big eight. So you can see there that we're talking about milk, eggs, fish, shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, sesame, and soy. So all of those things are considered declarable allergens. Now, there's actually, you might know people, or you might yourself be allergic to a food item other than these big nine. And that's definitely happens too. But the reason why the US government requires food manufacturers to label those nine allergens and not something like pork or tomatoes, which people are occasionally allergic to, is that 90% of food allergens are caused by these nine things. And the government, I think pretty smartly, decided a long time ago that nine items were manageable. So really, I think the list is like 140 different foods that people could be allergic to. Now, these declarable allergens have what's called a zero threshold, which means any tiniest little particle of that allergen you have to label in a product. Now, the exception is there's a couple things that aren't on that nine allergen list. Things, chemicals like sulfites. So sulfites can be in a product and remain unlabeled unless the amount of sulfites increases to over 10 parts per million. So people have to be really careful because sometimes their ingredients, their individual ingredients for their product won't will be below that 10 parts per million. But once they start combining their ingredients into their finished product, it makes the finished product rise above that threshold. So occasionally you'll see recalls on sulfites, especially actually in the cranberry juice industry, because it does happen from time to time. So it's definitely something to be thoughtful of. And also, if you wanted to use the word gluten free on your labels, it would have to have less than 20 parts per million gluten. So now, one of the allergens that really causes people a lot of heartburn is tree nuts, because tree nuts is actually a pretty general category and it contains quite a few different nuts. And if you are familiar with that list, you might know that in January of 2025, the FDA revised that list and actually shortened it. So it used to be about double this size, but there were a lot of kind of odd things on there, and it was really confusing people. So FDA decided to kind of consolidate that. So this is the official currently, as of 2025, this is the official tree nut list because people often ask me what is considered an allergenic tree nut and what is not. And the answer is whatever the FDA decides. And so you definitely need to source those regulations. And like we found this January, occasionally those do change. So make sure that you keep up with that. So you can see a lot of these very common tree nuts are on here. They kind of kept the most common ones, and some of the really weird ones like lychee nuts and things like that. They just ginkgo nuts were on there. The old list, they just kind of dropped those off. Now, a big tree nut prior to January 25 that everybody labeled was coconut, but FDA removed coconut from this tree nut list. So now if your product contains coconut, you really shouldn't be declaring coconut as a tree nut. It is not considered an allergen anymore or a declarable allergen by the FDA. So definitely something to pay close attention to. And while we're on the subject of declarable allergens and labels, just be cognizant of the fact that if you export product to another country, then they might not have the same declarable allergen list that we do here in America. So even if you're like, producing product and sending it across the border to Canada, which has very similar food laws than us, you have to include, in addition to the big nine that we have here in the USA, you also have to include mustard and I think celery. Oh, no, mustard and mollusks, sorry. Mustard and mollusks in addition to those big nine if you're sending product over the border to Canada. So be very, very careful. And again, in America, we have a zero tolerance for those nine allergens except for sulfites and gluten. All right. So prior to this, we've been really focused on food manufacturers and packaged food and the labeling requirements for that. But I did want to touch really briefly on food service establishments. And those are restaurants, hotels, casinos, food trucks, caterers. They're also required to notify their customers about these nine declarable allergens, but they have a lot more flexibility on how to issue that communication. So you can see here, there's kind of a couple lists of things that they can do. You might have seen like table tents and things like that are very, very common. But if you are a food service establishment, make sure you look up the Georgia Department of Public Health regulations on labeling because that is kind of in flux now, and they're starting to really get a little more strict on how they want those allergens to be declared. Allergen labeling for food manufacturers of packaged food is regulated on a federal level, so that's FDA and USDA. Food allergen labeling for food service is regulated state by state. So it's the Georgia Department of Georgia Department of Public Health for Georgia facilities, Georgia food service facilities. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what is an allergen. An allergen is a substance, usually a protein, that your immune system mistakenly thinks is a harmful substance. So in reality, allergen proteins aren't harmful, but your immune system just gets mixed up and starts attacking it and eliciting some of the immune responses that it would if there was a foreign invader that came in, like if you contracted the flu or something like that. And so it can come in a bunch of different forms. You can have allergen proteins that come in contact with your skin, like we in the South are very familiar with poison ivy. But there's also latex allergens and animal scratches. Some people are allergic to animal scratches and things like that. You can have injectable allergens, and that's usually insect bites, like a bee sting. And then you can eat or imbibe the allergenic proteins through medicine or food. And then the last is inhalation. And of course, we're all pretty familiar with their seasonal allergies that usually hit us in spring and fall. All right. So, occasionally, one of the reasons why we are very, very concerned about proper allergen labeling is because occasionally allergen allergenic reactions can be very severe and maybe even life-threatening. Allergenic reactions usually occur within seconds or minutes, very, very quick. And so you really want to make sure that you are probably treating that and also that all your products are labeled. Because the American public, that is their first defense to make sure that they're avoiding food allergens is to read those labels. So if the labels are wrong, that's the reason why FDA and USDA take it so seriously when labels are incorrect. So basically, what happens is, and we're going to talk about this a little in the next slide, but anaphylaxis is the most severe reaction to allergens, and that's when your blood pressure will drop. Sometimes your airways will narrow and you'll stop breathing. All kinds of crazy symptoms can be elicited because of this anaphylaxis. And if this happens, usually the only thing you can do is pray that somebody has an EpiPen close. And even if somebody has an EpiPen and is able to successfully treat it, um, it might require a follow-up trip to the emergency room. So it can definitely be fatal. All right. I hope y'all are ready for 30 seconds of hardcore biochemistry. So I was always curious about what exactly happens. Like, I understand food allergens are very, very severe and they can be life-threatening, but how? Why? So basically, what happens is these allergenic substances come in contact with B cells, and those are produced by your immune system. And so this starts eliciting a chemical reaction, and what happens is it triggers a chemical called histamine to be flooded into your system. And when this happens, your blood capillaries start to swell. And so if you think about it, this normally happens in areas where the protein comes in contact with the skin. And that's why medical allergies and food allergies are so dangerous because it's your tongue, it's your throat and tonsils, your mouth. Those are the tissues that are first eliciting these reactions. And so when the histamine is flooding your system in your head, it can easily lead to swelling of the tissues, which can lead to blocking the airways. So that's really what is the deadly symptom in food allergies. So if you ever see somebody that their mouth is starting to swell, immediately call 911 and try to find EpiPen. There are also different types of allergenic reactions. There are a lot of skin reactions, and this is when that histamine starts producing things like rashes, hives, sometimes severe dermatitis. And usually it's because that allergenic protein has come in contact with an area of the skin other than the mouth. So, just touching, just handling proteins, these allergenic proteins can sometimes elicit really strong reactions. So, currently, unfortunately, there is no cure for food allergies. Most food allergies are controlled in manufacturing facilities. They're controlled by things like separation of food products, um, special tools, special color coded tools and containers, cutting boards, things like that. Those are all the ways that we normally would control allergens. Um, and so, and of course, through labeling. Um, because currently there is no cure. There's no cure for food allergens. Um, Childhood allergens are the most common, and it's kind of odd. Sometimes kids just outgrow them, and you probably know somebody that had childhood allergy and just kind of once they hit 7, 8, kind of grade school, they just stop being as allergic. Um, there are actually some therapies. So some people, especially people that have seasonal allergies, a lot of times will go in for allergen shots. Well, they'll inject a very small amount of allergen into the body, periodic doses, and it sometimes helps the immune system naturally develop um, an adjustment to those proteins so that it can stop eliciting these undesirable symptoms. Now, this has been done for seasonal allergies for years, but they have just started doing some prevention methods for young children and babies, where they've slowly started introducing trace amounts of allergenic proteins to, something like baby food or a baby cereal or something like that. Um, in hopes of doing exactly what allergen shots have done for years and years. Now, this is a very, very dangerous and really should only be done in the care of a physician. Um, so just definitely be careful. My little nephew is allergic to peanuts, and he is actually going through this right now. And believe me, the pediatrician is definitely heavily involved in that. There's another medication out on the market, and it's actually for kids and adults, and it is a medication that helps lessen the symptoms. So it's really for situations where you would accidentally come in contact with this food allergen, especially for people that have extremely severe allergenic reactions. I know somebody that's actually taking it right now, and she said that, yeah, it's definitely making a difference. She can definitely tell. And so it's definitely not a cure, but it's definitely something to make people with severe food allergies have a little bit of comfort and a little bit of assurance. All right, let's talk about some food allergen facts. So I don't think this will surprise anybody, but peanuts are the leading cause of severe allergenic reactions. Um, it's not the most common allergen. I think soy is, but is definitely the most severe. So not all allergenic reactions are created equal. And this is the perplexing thing about allergens. So somebody can be allergic to milk, let's say, and then their brother is allergic to milk, and the symptoms are totally different, totally levels of severity. It can change over time. I've had several friends that have actually somehow adopted adult onset allergies. I had a coworker that was in a really bad car accident in his 30s. All of a sudden, he realized he's allergic to guacamole. So it was an avocado. He developed an avocado allergy. He was never allergic to avocados until that really traumatic injury. And that can definitely happen. You may have heard stories sometimes pregnant women, after they have a particularly difficult labor and difficult birth, they might develop some kind of wacky food allergy as well. So, we have about 3 million Americans that are allergic to peanuts or tree nuts alone. But in adults, the majority of allergenic reactions are peanuts, tree nuts, fish, and shellfish. All right. So here's where the really odd food allergen facts come in to play. Food allergies are one of the few ailments, let's call it, which affect um, the population more significantly the higher the economic status is. So, first world countries are more likely to have a larger population of children that have food allergies than a developing country. And of course, this is not person by person, this is over a huge amount of people, so an entire population. Also, if you're an only child or the oldest child, you're more likely to have childhood food allergies. And that is because the more children a family has and the younger the children, the more likely they are going to be exposed to trace amounts of these allergenic proteins as they're growing up. I mean, anybody that knows a family that has a baby and a toddler knows that if you hand that toddler a peanut butter sandwich, peanut butter is getting on the baby. That's just going to happen, right? So that is the reason why they think that this is the case. And then also, particularly in the Southeast, we're dealing with an urban legend come to life. And that is a tick whose bite sometimes causes something called the alpha-gal syndrome. And you may have heard this horror story. Sometimes these people that get bit by this tick develop an allergy to red meat. So beef and pork. And it is very, very true. It's something that is becoming more and more widespread. So definitely be careful when you are working out in your garden. All right. And then, of course, sorry, it's a little pop-up bubble between the late 90s and the mid 2000s. Cases of childhood allergens actually tripled. It's really, really amazing. And they really think that this is due to our, young parents' obsession with cleanliness and sanitation around their children, which everybody thinks is a good thing. But when food allergens are concerned, it might not necessarily be the best thing. And I think that parents are becoming aware of this, and they're not being so diligent when it comes to, making sure everybody, puts on hand sanitizer before they hold the baby and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see how this trend of childhood allergens fluctuates in the coming years and coming decades. So, last slide, just wanted to kind of summarize a couple things. Um, Please be cognizant that the USA requires that 9 allergens are required to be labeled on all retail packaged foods in the USA. Not all allergens, um, not all countries have that same allergen list. So if you are exporting product or your product's going over the country border, please be cognizant of that and look up that country, their allergen list. That should be really easy to plug into a search engine and find out. Some states are starting to require allergen labeling for restaurants. So definitely inquire with their regulatory agency here in Georgia. That's the Georgia Department of Public Health, to see what kind of allergen labeling is required for food service establishments like restaurants and food trucks and things like that. Now, currently, there are no thresholds for allergen labeling in the US. So that means even the tiniest little speck of contamination has to be labeled. And that's one of the leading causes of undeclared allergen recalls in America because we all know how easy it is to package the wrong product in the wrong box. The best way if you're looking for help with labeling is check out the FDA labeling guidance. It is actually a fantastic guidance document. And again, you can plug that FDA labeling guidance into any search engine and you can get that information very, very easily. Just wanted to let you know that FDA is holding a public meeting actually in a couple weeks on allergen thresholds. So there's been a lot of research into this that says that just because there's a tiny little speck of protein, it might not be enough to elicit a allergenic reaction. So definitely, if you're interested, those are open to the public. So again, you can plug that into a search engine or reach out to us and we'll be happy to let you know about that. If you're interested in learning more about allergens, we do have a grant currently available for very extremely low cost food safety classes. So it's a series of 6 one-day classes, and there's a one-on-one coaching session in between each class. And so please take advantage of that if you are interested. And then lastly, we would love to keep in touch with y'all. We have a quarterly food and beverage newsletter. And so if you take out your cameras and scan that QR code, you can sign up for that. And we promise we will not spam your inbox. We only send a newsletter out like, every 2 or 3 months. I wanted to finish up by telling you just a little bit about my department. So the Georgia Tech's Extension Department, that's the Georgia Manufacturing Extension Partnership. We are more than just food safety and quality, although we definitely do those things. We do all kinds of things: energy management, sustainability, quality, operational efficiency, thinking about automation. We have engineers on staff that help people with that, cybersecurity, leadership, and so much more. So if you're ever interested in any of those, you can reach out to us and we'd be happy to connect you with that. And just like Andrea and I, all of our project managers have experience in the industry, so they really, really know what they're doing. And with that, I'm just going to end with our business cards. These are virtual business cards for both Andrea and myself. You can always reach out to us. Probably the best way is by email. But yes, we would always love to hear from y'all.